The corridor on the 4th floor towards the city was one of the few places he was allowed to visit as part of the high staff. Still, barely anyone came by. He didn't know where all of those doors led to, only a few he could open without a key, but all they contained were broken furniture and the decoration for the feasting hall. It didn't matter though. Dew wasn't here for a practical task. The outside he could see through the average-sized plain windows was grey. The summer was unusually cloudy and dark, so Sean had guessed autumn would come soon, which would put even more pressure on most farmers than they already had. The glass was cold, perfect to rest his aching head on. The weather switches between hot and cold slowly began to get to him as well. Then there was his new occurring thirstiness. The small spots all across his body had developed further, and with them the dryness of his skin got worse and worse. The morning Avery had noticed and asked to help him, but he had declined. Her state hadn't gotten much better than the day before. Standing was hard. She hadn't been capable of expressing any kind of emotion or even talking for extended amounts of time. After several minutes she just ended up mute. Dew had recommended not to go out and continue to train. Luckily she hadn't considered it. It was supposed to be afternoon, yet it appeared to be close to night. When he lifted the hook which held the frames together and opened the window, he could smell the rain which would soon begin to fall. But it was hot outside, so he quickly sealed it shut again. He went further down the corridor, watching the 2 winged doors pass by him. Perhaps they were a more inconveniently placed storage room. He wondered what the architect had thought while developing the layout for the castle. Probably not so much, since the whole setup was poorly done. While delivering a plate from the kitchen to the dining room, he almost feared the food would cool down until he was done traveling the unnecessarily complicated way. The corridor ended up in another staircase, but he didn't want to go just yet. Usually he would have gone to his room, but after a short conversation with his partner they had agreed to leave the other some space. She had come directly from her shift and had literally collapsed before him, which he took as a sign that he was the one having to search for a different place. Finding it had been an accident from a month ago. Sue had been there for a second and confirmed him in his right to be there as long as nobody exclusively sent him away, so Dew abused that power whenever he felt like it. It was quiet until the rain started falling as he had predicted. He wished there to be a blanket or similar to fully appreciate the circumstance, and standing still significantly cooled his body down, but he had left the cape in the room. An unfamiliar noise had him flinch before turning around to search for the source. It was the sound of one of the doors opening not too far behind him. There stood a small and round girl in a simple dark blue dress. She wasn't wearing her little crown, and her hair wasn't tight as usual. Her amber eyes were staring at him, while she was still holding the door open. "Oh," she exclaimed quietly, "it's you. What are you doing here?" Dew didn't expect her to address him so directly. Him, her servant. "I appreciate the silence," he replied, unsure whether to bow before her or walk up to her as if they were more than 20-minute acquaintances. "I understand. Would you care to join me? I'm practicing the art of painting and it's quite lonely." Hesitantly, Dew followed her inside the room. It was more of a request after all. It was large enough to have windows as big as the doors of a balcony towards the patio which, together with several lamps with burning candles, brightened up the room a comfortable amount. There was little furnishing, only several shelves on the wall to the right. Then there were easels, of which one was placed near the center of the room and had a canvas placed on top of it. Next to it stood a movable tiny table, displaying various tools such as quills, brushes and coal, as well as various colorful splotches. Paint, Dew assumed, even though he had had no particular contact with art except the casual scratch Avery produced from time to time. Several sofas stood around in no particular order. Every spot on the wall was covered with drawings. Some were fully finished and full-body portraits showing people of power. Others were done in a simple manner, and the people displayed didn't show off crowns, jewelry, or relics to present their status. Then there were drawings as large as the wall of Dew's room, showing a beautiful scenery of hills and rivers reaching as far as one could see. Alba went towards the canvas, and Dew followed closely behind her. Before him a brown blob revealed itself. It had eyes and a very white stripe underneath, which he guessed could represent teeth. Next to the canvas stood a handy mirror. The girl picked up the brush and dipped it in the brown color on display and began refining the blob's edges. "I'm trying a self-portrait, but it's not going so well," she announced. It did look rather ridiculous, and if it were anyone else, you might have immediately commented on who was supposed to look like that. Or maybe he wouldn't have, because it would be rude to do so, and it wasn't as if he had artistic talent beyond comprehension. The opposite was the case. A tree was a stick with a cloud on top. A man was a stick man, and a woman was a stick man with a triangle for legs, because that was the most socially acceptable depiction of people. Even the stick figures of his hangman game were disproportionate. "I surely like the skin tone. It matches well." Dew tried to encourage her somehow. She sighed and responded unhappily, "It doesn't, it's too dark." Then she shifted her hand to show him the mess of colors she had created trying to match herself. She opened the drawer and the movable shelf, slipped her hand inside, and as she pulled it out again, she held a small square piece of paper in her hand. He could immediately notice the style with the messy charcoal lines, but he had never in his life seen a woman before who smiled teasingly at him. Shoulder-long hair, big eyes, small nose, and wearing a guard uniform without the metal armor part. "I've been trying to get good at this so I can draw me and my mom at some point," she whined while holding up the paper for him to see. "Where did you get that drawing from?" he wanted to know, reaching out for the paper that belonged to his own diary. She put it back into the drawer without closing it before he could touch it. "I spoke to my aunt a couple of times and she gave this to me. She said she had a couple and that I need it as much as she does." So that's what she meant when she said he'd have to ask Sue. "Have you been talking to her frequently?" "Sadly not. She expressed the areas she supervises are mostly on the other end of the castle, but sometimes when I leave dining room and she has been standing guard, I sneak her a note with a meeting location on it. She's a lovely person," Albert told him. "We meet here if possible or in the other entertainment rooms." She continued painting while Dew silently watched her, uncertain of what to do next. She suddenly looked up from her work. "Oh, right. So next to this one is a dancing and a music room with several instruments. Then there's a room for board games and smaller meetings. I don't use those, though. We barely have visitors, and I will only get to see Derek again when we get married next year." "Do you not have friends who can accompany you?" Dew wondered out loud, hoping not to sound rude. She sighed with frustration, put the brush aside and gestured to him to follow her to the wall with most of the portraits. "Whom am I supposed to be friends with? I'm not allowed to talk to the common people, and most of the adults are either busy with work or boring old men. Patricia, my governor, told me of the times where we used to host families of nobility, but this idea went so south after my father's siblings passed away one by one. Someone else had to rule the empty areas." She stood before a series of portraits. There were 2 men with ridiculous mustaches depicted, and 1 woman in a white curly wig. All of them had features like scales, snake-like eyes, and the first older-looking man even had gills on his neck. Then there was a single ceiling-height family portrait with those 3 people as children, a man, which Dew immediately recognized as King Rufus I, wearing a cold expression, and a mostly human-like woman, but without ears or visible eyelids. All of their faces were grotesque, not only because of their overly dominant hybrid features, but because of their mismatched proportions originating from years of inbreeding, as Frederick had once described. Alba began to explain. "These 3 siblings used to be responsible for ruling specific sections of the kingdom to keep up friendly contact between those areas and the crown. As you might have heard, they all passed away due to various circumstances, so there was no one left of the family capable of ruling over those sections but the nobility housing right inside the castle, which wasn't family. You probably remember some of those carriages that arrived when I tried to, that one woman that unfortunately passed away." She chuckled anxiously with a fake smile and haunted eyes. Dew went along the wall to take a closer look at all those faces coldly staring into the distance. Too disturbing to appreciate, but too interesting to look away. Comparing their morphed appearance with the small princess next to him, she looked almost as purely human as Sue. He came upon a place on the wall which had been entirely sealed off by a heavy curtain. "What's with this here?" Dew turned around to ask Alba, who had followed him up to this point. She shrugged. "Father said not to open it. I don't know why." He felt a devilish smirk manifest itself on his lips, and his fingertips touched the thick cloth. "Do you want to know why?" "I certainly do." His voice echoed through the large room. At first she stared at him, unsure about the situation. Then her curiosity took over, and she waved her little hand as a symbol for him to proceed. It was hard to pull it from one end to the corner. 2 more portraits were revealed to them, and he heard an astounded gasp coming from Alba. Its own reaction was the same, but in silence. One frame showed a bust shot of a handsome woman, but that word alone wouldn't do her justice, because she was drop-dead gorgeous. There was smooth skin the color of caramel milk, with tiny freckles all over her thin but not malnourished figure. Her chin was sharp, but her chocolate eyes were soft. Wavy ginger hair fell over her shoulders, and 2 pointy rosy ears peeked out in between the strands. Her clothing was simple, but reminded him of a fine dress a common woman might wear on a day of celebration. Dew stared at her with wide eyes and unmoving hands for a while before he could loosen his gaze to look at Alba. Her face reminded him of himself the first time he had learned about the process of reproduction. She had her mouth slightly open, and so were her eyes, and her eyebrows were basically in her hair. Dew sucked in his lips to keep himself from laughing as she bursted out, "Is there more than one goddess?" The picture above was unfinished, but he could still recognize the woman again, but this time she sat next to a man almost exactly as tall as her. Dew could recognize the sofa they sat on as being one of those in the drawing-room. In the first portrait she had smiled dreamily. In this one she showed her perfect white teeth. Her dress was different, light green with the hint of fine embroidery on her bust and puffy sleeves starting under her exposed shoulders. She wore the same diadem as Alba would on a big occasion. The man wore a classical royal uniform in blue and had his brown hair tied into a short braid. His gaze was on the woman, and he had his arm around her waist. Dew hated the picture those 2 painted. He didn't want to believe what and who he saw, because he immediately knew who was depicted and in what scenario they were in. Of course those drawings had been hidden away. Who could stand looking at them? "They are so well done. It's a shame the artist abandoned the project. Who do you think they are?" Alba innocently asked. "I'm glad he abandoned it," Dew spat, which had Alba look up at him with a frown. "Why is that?" He gestured at the second picture and rambled, "Can you not even recognize your own father? You see him every day for longer than I do." Her face immediately collapsed into itself as she realized. Dew put his hands on his waist and loudly explained, "The woman you can see here was the last queen to this day. Adelina was said to be a fairy-type being, but her children weren't, which was their doom. She ended up hanging herself. Isn't that interesting?" "Close it off again," Alba demanded, and Dew didn't hesitate to follow her command. He began to drag the curtain with force, but it got stuck after only a moment. With shaking he tried to force it forwards, and when it loosened he stumbled backwards while the curtain slammed against the lower picture, the one of the queen, and tore it down. Luckily it didn't fall far, so neither frame nor portrait sustained any damage. Dew quickly went to pick it up and desperately hoped his sweaty fingers wouldn't leave fingerprints. He held it up and searched for the attachment, which he found out to be a nail in the wall. Looking over the back of the frame to find a matching loop, he stumbled over a signature. It was messy and curvy, but he knew the style, so he knew how to decipher it, and his heart skipped a beat as he read the name. The picture was placed back on the wall, and the red cloth covered everything once again, as if nothing had happened. "I think I just learned what person could help you with your portrait," Dew then proclaimed, and watched as excitement filled the princess's eyes. Then he continued, "But I have to ask my boss if he still does commissions first."